The city skyline glowed under the morning sun, tall glass buildings shining like silver mirrors, and inside one of those towers, the CEO of a major company stood in front of the mirror in his office, his tie perfectly straight, his hair slicked back, but his eyes carried the heavy weight of fear. Today was not just another meeting. Today was the day that would decide the future of his empire. For weeks, the company had prepared for this moment. Investors were flying in from different countries. Partners were waiting to see new strategies, and the employees whispered nervously in the hallways. Everyone knew that one wrong move could destroy everything. The CEO had built his reputation on confidence and sharp decisions, but deep inside he felt cracks forming. The market was unstable. The competitors were hungry, and his company had suffered failures in the last few months. This meeting was his last chance to prove he still had control. The boardroom was prepared like a battlefield. Sleek black chairs lined up, a massive projector set at the front, and assistants arranging papers and glasses of water on the polished wooden table. Security men walked around with serious expressions, making sure everything was perfect downstairs. The cleaning staff finished their duties early. One of them was a middle-aged woman in a simple uniform. She carried her tools quietly. Her daughter followed her, a young girl with bright, curious eyes the mother often brought her when she had no one to leave her with. The girl loved walking through the tall buildings. She felt small in the hallways, but her mind was always alive with wonder. She saw people in sharp suits rushing, talking quickly into their phones, holding folders like weapons. She listened to their nervous voices. Words like deadline, presentation, and funding echoed in her ears. Though no one paid attention to her, she was just the daughter of the janitor. Invisible to the powerful, the CEO entered the boardroom, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. His assistants rushed to him with last-minute notes. One whispered about technical files, another about seating arrangements. His face remained calm on the outside, but inside his chest his heart hammered like a drum. As the clock ticked closer to the meeting hour, more people filled the room. Investors in expensive suits, their eyes sharp like hawks. Journalists ready to write headlines. Some allies, some enemies waiting for him to stumble. The CEO shook hands, smiled politely, but sweat formed on the back of his neck. In a quiet corner near the cleaning staff, the janitor's daughter watched. She saw the tension in every movement, the fear hidden behind every fake smile. She noticed the projector screen standing tall like a judge waiting to declare a verdict. Her young mind sensed that something big was about to happen. The CEO rehearsed his speech in his mind again and again. Numbers, strategies, and promises rolled like storm clouds. He reminded himself of his success, the long nights, the victories of the past, but doubt whispered in his ear. What if the files don't open? What if the system fails? What if they see weakness? The janitor finished wiping the glass doors. Her daughter leaned against the wall holding a small notebook. She often scribbled ideas in notes. She loved solving puzzles and watching machines. She had learned things from online videos that even adults ignored. But in this world, her talent was hidden under the shadow of her mother's uniform. Finally, the main doors closed and silence fell. The meeting began. The CEO stood tall at the head of the table, cameras focused on him, dozens of eyes watching. The projector glowed faintly, waiting for the first slide. His voice broke the silence with practiced authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, today marks the beginning of a new chapter," he said, his tone confident, though his throat was dry. The audience leaned forward, pens ready, phones recording. He clicked the remote to start his grand presentation. The screen was supposed to light up with colorful graphs and bold numbers, but in that second, nothing happened. The projector flickered, then went dark. A sharp error message flashed. The sound system buzzed for a moment before dying. The files that were supposed to save his company refused to open, and the silence turned into a storm of whispers. The CEO froze, his finger still on the remote, his smile stiff inside him. Panic began to rise like fire. At the back of the room, unnoticed, the janitor's daughter straightened, her eyes locked on the frozen screen. Her heart beat faster, because while everyone else saw failure, she saw a puzzle waiting to be solved, and that was how the big day began. A day that would test power, pride, and the hidden strength of someone nobody expected. The error message on the projector burned like a wound across the giant screen, red letters flashing over a black background. The room fell into a sharp silence. Every breath sounded louder. Every eye turned toward the CEO, waiting for him to fix it, waiting for him to prove his control. His hand trembled slightly as he pressed the remote again and again, but nothing changed. The system refused to respond. His assistant rushed to his side, whispering nervously, "We tested it earlier. It was working." But the CEO could only stare at the blank wall. The investors exchanged uneasy glances. Their sharp pens paused above their notepads. One of them leaned back in his chair with a smirk. Another whispered something to his neighbor. A few of them already pulled out their phones, typing quickly, no doubt sending messages about the disaster unfolding before their eyes. The CEO cleared his throat and forced a smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, just a minor technical delay," he said, his voice carrying fake confidence, but the words sounded thin. The tension in the room grew thicker. The silence stretched like a rope ready to snap. He motioned to the technical team. 3 men in black rushed forward. They tapped the keyboard, checked cables, unplugged and plugged them again. Sweat formed on their foreheads as the screen blinked once, then went dark again. The projector gave a faint hum before dying completely. Gasps and whispers filled the boardroom. The journalists in the back began to scribble furiously. One even snapped a photo of the frozen CEO. This was news. The powerful man who once dominated markets now stood helpless before a broken machine. The CEO's heart pounded. His carefully prepared lines scattered in his mind. His throat dried as he tried to continue without the presentation. "Our vision for the future is clear," he said. But his words were drowned by the loud buzz of the dead microphone. His voice cracked. The room filled with muffled laughter from a corner. An investor spoke up, his tone sharp. "If your systems can't even handle a meeting, how can they handle millions of dollars?" The words hit like a knife. Others nodded silently. Some rolled their eyes. The CEO felt the floor slipping beneath him. At the back of the room, the janitor's daughter clutched her small notebook. Her eyes focused not on the CEO's trembling hands, but on the error message. She recognized the problem. She had seen something like it before while experimenting on an old laptop at home. Her fingers itched to act, but who would listen to her? She was invisible here. The mother placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, whispering for her to stay still. But the girl shook her head, her mind racing. She couldn't watch silently while everything crumbled, not when she knew she could help. Meanwhile, the CEO felt his vision blur, sweat dripping down his temple. Every second stretched longer, every silence heavier. He thought about the headlines waiting outside. CEO fails big presentation. Investors lose trust. He thought about the faces of his employees who depended on him. The families who needed this company to survive. His assistant leaned close again, whispering desperately, "Maybe just speak without the slides." But the CEO knew that without the graphs, without the data, his words were empty. The investors would never trust him. One of the investors stood up, shaking his head. "This is a waste of time," he said loudly. Pushing his chair back, the sound echoed in the silent room. Others looked ready to follow. The CEO's chest tightened. Panic clawed at him. He was losing control. The empire he had built was collapsing before his very eyes. And then, through the heavy silence, a soft voice spoke. "I can fix it." Heads turned in confusion. The words didn't come from the assistants, or the technicians, or the board members. They came from the back of the room, from a girl no one had noticed before. The janitor's daughter stepped forward, clutching her notebook tightly. Her eyes steady, her voice clear, she repeated, "I can fix it." The room erupted in murmurs. Some investors laughed, one scoffed. "What is this? A joke," another muttered. "Ridiculous." The janitor rushed to stop her daughter, whispering, "Please, don't embarrass yourself." But the girl's eyes were firm. She had seen the problem. She knew the solution. The CEO stared at her in shock, his mind too overwhelmed to process what was happening. All he saw was a child stepping into the battlefield, and for a second he felt insulted. But another second later he realized he had no choice. Everything else had failed. The technical team froze, their hands hovering uselessly over the keyboard. The investors shook their heads, waiting to see the humiliation. But the girl took a step closer, her small figure standing against the towering screen, her presence quiet but unshaken. And in that moment, as the CEO's empire seemed ready to collapse completely, hope came from the most unexpected place, from a girl no one respected, from someone the world had ignored. The collapse was real, but so was the beginning of something no one could have imagined. It was the beginning of something no one could have imagined. The room felt frozen in time, the air heavy with disbelief. A janitor's daughter had just stepped forward, her voice still echoing in the silence. "I can fix it," she had said, and every eye now rested on her, some filled with amusement, some with annoyance, and some with open disbelief. The CEO blinked hard, his heart still racing from the collapse of his presentation. He could not understand why this girl dared to speak. He saw her small hands clutching a notebook, her clothes plain, her hair tied back quickly. She looked like a child who had wandered into the wrong place. Yet her eyes held a sharpness he could not ignore. Investors muttered among themselves. "This is ridiculous," one whispered loudly. "She's just a kid," another scoffed. "This company is finished if we're depending on a janitor's daughter." Laughter spread through the corner of the room. Cruel and dismissive, but the girl didn't flinch. She stood with her shoulders straight, her gaze locked on the dead projector screen. Her mother grabbed her arm, whispering desperately, "Please don't do this, we'll get in trouble. You don't belong here." But the girl shook her head softly. "I know what's wrong," she whispered back, her voice calm and sure. Her mother's hand trembled, but she could not hold her daughter back. The determination was too strong. The CEO's mind spun in circles. Everything had failed. His assistants were useless. The technicians were sweating with panic. The investors were ready to leave. His empire was seconds away from collapse, and here was a girl offering help. It felt absurd, insulting even, but deep inside, a small voice reminded him that he had no other choice. "Let her try," the CEO said suddenly. His voice sharp but tired. The technicians stared in shock. The investors erupted in louder murmurs. Some shook their heads, some smirked with disbelief, but no one could stop it now. The girl was already stepping forward. She walked past the long, polished table, her small figure reflected in its glossy surface, past men in expensive suits who stared at her like she was invisible dirt, her shoes tapping against the floor in steady rhythm. She looked so out of place yet so sure of herself. When she reached the projector, she dropped her notebook on the table beside it, opening the pages filled with messy sketches, diagrams, and notes. The investors leaned forward in curiosity, some frowning at the childish handwriting, but her fingers moved with purpose. She tapped the keyboard lightly. Scanning the error code on the screen, her eyes narrowed. She had seen it before. It wasn't a hardware failure like the technicians thought. It was a corrupted software pathway, something she had once fixed on her old second-hand laptop at home, a problem that had taken her hours back then, but now she knew exactly where to go. The room was silent except for the sound of her typing. The technicians stood frozen behind her. Too stunned to move, one of them whispered. "What is she even doing?" another muttered. "She'll break it worse," but the girl ignored them. Her focus sharp like a blade. The CEO's chest tightened as he watched. Part of him hoped she could actually do something. Part of him feared he was letting a child humiliate him in front of the world. But he had no other option left. The investors grew restless. One crossed his arms and said loudly, "This is wasting time," another whispered. "If this is his solution, I'm pulling out my money." But even as they mocked, their eyes couldn't leave the girl. There was something strange about the way she worked. Her calmness, her speed, her quiet confidence. Her mother stood at the back, wringing her hands, tears forming in her eyes. Fear battled with pride inside her. She had always known her daughter was special, always fixing broken radios, solving puzzles no one else could. But she had never imagined her little girl standing here, in front of the most powerful men, trying to save a crumbling empire. The girl pressed a final key and paused, her fingers resting lightly on the keyboard. The screen flickered once, twice, then glowed back to life. The projector hummed softly. The slides appeared crisp and bright, as if mocking everyone who had doubted her. Gasps filled the room, even the loudest critics fell silent. The graphs and numbers the CEO had prepared shone across the wall. The presentation was alive again. For a long moment, no one moved. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint sound of the projector fan. The girl stepped back calmly. Her eyes meeting the CEO's, she said softly, "It's ready now." The CEO could hardly breathe. Relief and shock battled inside him. His empire had been saved, not by his team, not by his technology experts, but by the daughter of a janitor, someone he had never noticed until this very moment. The investors whispered again, but their tones were different now. Not mocking, but surprised. Some leaned forward in interest. Others exchanged thoughtful looks. The mood of the room had shifted. The girl picked up her notebook, clutching it against her chest. She returned quietly to her mother's side, her face calm but her heart beating fast. She had done what no one expected. She had stepped out of the shadows and fixed what the powerful could not. The CEO took a deep breath and turned back to the audience, his voice steadier now. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "shall we continue?" And as he began his speech again, the girl sat silently at the back, unnoticed once more by most, but carrying inside her the secret knowledge that she had turned the tide. She was the silent observer no longer. She was the hidden hand that had changed everything. The projector glowed once again, its light washing across the wall with sharp colors. The numbers and graphs that the CEO had prepared filled the room. The audience sat in stunned silence. Even the journalists lowered their pens for a moment. They could not believe what had just happened. A janitor's daughter had done what the trained staff could not. She had walked forward calmly, touched the system, and brought it back to life. The investors looked at each other with uneasy expressions. Some felt embarrassed for mocking her. Others still refused to believe it was real. The CEO stood at the head of the table, his face pale but his back straighter now. He had been seconds away from humiliation, seconds away from the end of his empire. Yet this girl had pulled him back from the edge. He cleared his throat, forcing himself to regain authority. "Thank you for your patience," he said. "Let us continue." But the investors did not move easily this time. One of them leaned forward and said with sharp curiosity, "Who is she?" His finger pointed toward the girl at the back. Her notebook clutched tightly against her chest. Whispers spread again. The room no longer looked only at the CEO. It looked at the child who had dared to step into their world. Her mother tried to shield her, whispering, "Stay quiet now. Don't get involved again," but the girl shook her head gently. Her eyes steady, she had not come forward for applause. She had come forward because she couldn't stand watching people fail when she knew she could help. Her heart told her to act, even if the world thought she didn't belong. One investor muttered, "This is absurd, a child fixing our systems. How unprofessional." Another smirked and whispered, "Maybe she's lucky, nothing more." But deep inside, they all knew it was not luck. It was skill, it was confidence, it was courage. The CEO hesitated for a moment. Then he did something unexpected. He turned toward the girl and asked loudly, "What did you do?" His voice carried both suspicion and awe. The girl looked at him without fear, her hand still holding her notebook. She spoke clearly. "The problem wasn't the machine. It was the path of the file. It was broken, I rebuilt it and forced the system to restart." The investors frowned. Some of them didn't even understand her words, but the CEO did. He knew enough to realize that she had not guessed. She had known exactly what she was doing. Her explanation was not random, it was precise. The journalists began writing again. But this time the story had changed. They weren't just recording the collapse of a powerful man. They were recording the bold step of a girl who came from nowhere and commanded attention. The CEO felt a rush of strange emotions. Pride, shame, relief, and fear all mixed inside him. He had ignored the girl when she stood in the corner. He had nearly dismissed her, but now he realized she had saved him. And not only him, she had saved everyone in that room from witnessing disaster. One of the investors chuckled coldly. "Fine, she fixed a toy, but we're not here for toys. We're here for a vision, a company, a future." His words sliced the air, trying to pull back the focus. But the girl raised her chin slightly and said, "Sometimes the smallest details decide the future, if no one fixes them." "Nothing else matters." Gasps filled the room again. Some laughed at her boldness. Some frowned at her daring to speak against men with power. But the CEO looked at her with new eyes. Her words, simple as they were, carried a truth he himself had forgotten. Her mother covered her face with her hands, whispering, "Why are you saying so much? They'll laugh at you." But the girl didn't stop. She had stepped forward once, and she wasn't going to retreat into silence now. She had felt the sting of invisibility too long. Today she would not stay hidden. The CEO raised a hand to silence the murmurs. "Let her speak," he said, his voice firm. The room froze. The investors stared at him in shock, but he continued, "If she was brave enough to step forward when we were collapsing, then we can listen to her now." The girl looked at him, her eyes shining with both fear and determination. She never thought he would give her permission to speak. Determination. She never thought he would give her permission to speak. She never thought her words would matter in a place like this. Yet here she was, standing on the battlefield of business and power. She spoke slowly. "You plan to show them the future of your company, but they already doubt you. You wanted the machine to do the talking for you, but the truth is people trust action more than promises. You can't only show numbers, you have to show strength when things go wrong." The room turned quiet. No one laughed this time. The CEO stared at her. Her words struck deep into him. He realized she had spoken the very thing he had forgotten. Leadership was not just about shining numbers. It was about standing strong when everything collapsed. The investors leaned back, some thoughtful, some skeptical, but none could deny the impact of her words. The janitor's daughter had dared to teach them something. The CEO turned back toward the screen. his chest rising with a new kind of energy. His fear slowly melting away because in the most unexpected way, this girl had reminded him what real leadership was. The bold step she had taken had changed everything. And the meeting was no longer just his fight. It had become her stage too. The boardroom no longer felt the same. Moments ago, it had been filled with tension, humiliation, and collapse. But now there was something else in the air. A strange mix of curiosity and disbelief. The janitor's daughter stood quietly at the back again, her notebook pressed to her chest. Yet the weight of her actions still lingered in the minds of everyone. The CEO began his presentation once more. This time his voice steadier, his shoulders more square. The graphs and charts glowed brightly on the projector. His words carried strength again. But he knew deep inside that the true turning point had already passed. It wasn't his slides that saved him. It was the unexpected boldness of a girl no one had respected. The investors listened, but their eyes shifted again and again toward the corner where she sat. Some of them frowned, uncomfortable with the thought that their judgment had been wrong. Others were intrigued, whispering quietly about how she had fixed the system in seconds when trained staff had failed. One man in a dark suit leaned toward his neighbor and said, "She didn't guess, did you see her?" "She knew exactly what she was doing," another replied. "Impossible, she's just a child," but even as he spoke, doubt flickered in his eyes. Her mother sat beside her. Still shaking with nerves, she whispered, "You should not have spoken, you will get us into trouble." But her daughter only looked at the screen calmly. Her heart still racing from the courage it took, she didn't regret it. Not for a second. She had spent years teaching herself quietly, fixing broken radios, solving puzzles, studying codes on her old computer. Now for the first time, her hidden world had stepped into the light. The CEO's voice carried on, describing visions of growth, strategies and partnerships, but in the back of his mind, he could still hear her words. People trust action more than promises. He realized how sharp her mind was, how fearless her spirit had been in that moment. And for the first time in years, he felt humbled. The investors began asking questions. Sharp, pointed, designed to test him, he answered with confidence. But when the questions shifted toward technology and system reliability, the air in the room grew heavier again. They were ready to challenge him on the very failure that had nearly destroyed him earlier. Before the CEO could respond, a quiet voice spoke again from the corner. "The system is strong now," it was the girl. Heads turned sharply. Her mother gasped and tried to pull her back. But it was too late, she had spoken. "It won't fail again because I rebuilt its path. The weakness wasn't in the machine. It was in the way the files were handled. Anyone could have seen it. But no one looked close enough." Murmurs swept the room. Some investors smirked, others frowned. But a few nodded slowly. They didn't fully understand her words, but they understood the certainty in her tone. Her calmness made it clear she wasn't bluffing. One investor chuckled. "And you know this." "How?" His voice dripping with sarcasm. But the girl answered without fear. "Because I've fixed harder things with less." She held up her notebook. Pages filled with messy handwriting, codes, and diagrams. Her private world of learning and curiosity, now exposed to the eyes of powerful men. The CEO leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the notebook. He saw the messy lines, the symbols, the patterns, and though they looked like chaos to most, he recognized fragments of logic, formulas, and solutions. He realized she wasn't just a lucky child. She was a hidden genius. The investors didn't know what to say. Some laughed nervously. Others whispered angrily that this was a waste of time. But the CEO raised his hand and silenced them. His voice firm. "She is right," he said. "The weakness was in the way we prepared, not in the system itself." The room froze. The CEO had just defended her. The girl lowered her eyes shyly. Her mother's lips parted in shock. She had never seen a man of such power speak for her daughter. The investors were unsettled. They wanted to dismiss the girl, but they could not. Her actions had saved them all from disaster. And now her words had reached even the CEO. The CEO took a step back, letting silence stretch, then he spoke again. "Sometimes genius doesn't wear a suit. Sometimes it hides where no one looks." His words struck the room like a hammer. The journalists scribbled furiously. This was no longer just a business meeting. It was becoming a story. The girl sat quietly again, her heart pounding. She hadn't meant to stand out so much, she only wanted to help. But now the entire room was looking at her like she was more than just the janitor's daughter. Some with respect, some with jealousy, some with suspicion. Her mother touched her hand, whispering, "You've done enough. Stay quiet now." But deep inside, the girl felt something new rising for the first time in her life. She wasn't invisible. Her voice had mattered. Her knowledge had made a difference. She was still scared, but she also felt powerful. The CEO turned back to the investors, his speech rolling forward with renewed strength, but everything had changed. His empire wasn't saved by charts and numbers. It was saved by the courage and brilliance of a girl who had lived in the shadows. And though she sat silently once more, every person in that room now carried the same thought in their minds. She was not just a child, she was a hidden genius, and the world had just caught its first glimpse of her. The boardroom was no longer the battlefield it had been an hour ago. The graphs shone brightly on the screen. The CEO spoke with strength in his voice again, and the investors listened carefully. Yet everyone knew deep down that the real story was not the slides. It was the girl who had stepped out of the shadows and brought light to the collapsing room. Her mother sat close to her, whispering again and again, "Stay quiet now, please. Don't say more." But the girl's mind was still racing. She didn't want attention. She didn't want applause. But she couldn't stop seeing problems others ignored, and she couldn't stop thinking about solutions. The investors leaned back in their seats, their sharp eyes scanning the CEO as he presented bold numbers and promises. But in their minds, doubt still lingered. Some of them whispered to each other about the collapse earlier. Others scribbled notes about weaknesses. They had not forgotten how close the company had come to falling apart. The CEO felt their doubt pressing against him like a heavy weight. He could hear the whispers, see the skeptical eyes. His voice grew louder as he tried to hold their attention, but he knew he needed more. Numbers alone were not enough. He needed to prove resilience, prove adaptability, prove that this company could survive storms. And then, as if fate itself pushed her forward, the janitor's daughter raised her hand slightly, her small voice breaking the air. "There's more you can show them," she said, her words quiet yet clear. The room froze again, head snapped toward her. Her mother gasped. "No, please stop," she begged. But the girl stood slowly, clutching her notebook, her legs shaking but her spirit firm. The investors frowned. "What is this?" one said with irritation. "Is this a schoolroom?" Another muttered. "She should not even be here." But the girl ignored them, her eyes fixed on the projector screen. She stepped forward again, past the line of suits and cold stares, past the polished shoes and expensive watches. Her simple clothes and small notebook looked out of place, yet her presence carried a strange strength. The CEO watched her carefully, torn between fear and hope. She had already saved him once, but what was she about to do now? He raised a hand to silence the investors. "Let her speak," he said firmly, his voice carrying authority. The murmurs fell quiet. The girl placed her notebook on the table and flipped it open. Messy pages filled with lines of writing, diagrams and codes. She pointed at one page and said, "Your system doesn't just show numbers, it can simulate them. It can predict future outcomes if you connect it correctly. You planned to show the past, but you could show the future." The room gasped. Even the technicians leaned forward, staring at her notes. The investors exchanged uneasy looks. Some scoffed, "Ridiculous," others whispered, "If it's true." Their voices trailed off. The CEO stepped closer, his eyes scanning the notebook, his mind racing. Her messy handwriting looked chaotic, but he could see the logic, the connections, the ideas. She had built something out of nothing, something his own team had never shown him. His chest tightened as realization struck him. She wasn't just clever, she was far ahead of them. "Can you do it?" he asked quietly, almost as if speaking to himself, but the girl nodded firmly. "Yes," she said, her voice calm. "If you give me permission." The investors erupted in noise again. "This is madness," one shouted. "You're trusting a child with millions of dollars at stake," another barked. "We should walk out now." The air filled with chaos. But the CEO raised his hand again. His voice thundered above them. "Enough," he said. The room fell silent. His eyes locked on the girl. "Do it." Her mother covered her face. Tears forming in her eyes, she was terrified. But she could not stop her daughter now. She watched as the girl stepped up to the projector again, her small hands moving across the keyboard with steady confidence, her eyes scanning lines of data faster than most adults could read. The investors leaned forward despite themselves, curiosity pulling them in. The journalists scribbled furiously, their pens scratching across paper. The technicians whispered nervously, watching as she moved like she had been born for this. Her fingers danced across the keys, creating pathways, forcing connections, rewriting parts of the system in real time. Her messy notebook lay open beside her, guiding her steps. Within minutes, the frozen static graphs began to shift. New patterns appeared. The numbers stretched forward, building curves and projections. The past transformed into the future before their eyes. Gasps echoed through the boardroom. The investors stared in shock. The graphs showed possibilities they had never seen. Markets, profits, and growth simulated in ways they had only dreamed of. Their skeptical eyes widened. Their pens paused, the CEO's heart pounded. His empire was not just alive again. It was stronger than ever. This girl had turned humiliation into triumph, collapse into innovation, weakness into strength. When she stepped back, the screen glowed with living data. The future painted in colors across the wall. She looked at the CEO and said softly, "Now they will see what you wanted them to see." The room was silent. No one laughed now, no one scoffed. Even the coldest investor leaned back slowly, his sharp eyes softened by surprise. The journalists' pens could not move fast enough. The technicians shook their heads in disbelief. The CEO took a step forward, his voice steady and strong. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his hand pointing at the glowing screen. "This is not luck. This is not chance. This is the strength of vision. This is the strength of resilience." His words rang through the room, and in that moment the turning point had arrived. The investors who had doubted him now sat in silence, watching, listening, and realizing that the company they had nearly abandoned might be something far greater than they imagined. And at the heart of it all stood the girl, the hidden genius who had stepped boldly into their world and changed everything. The boardroom was glowing with energy now. The screen displayed more than numbers. It displayed vision. It displayed a future that felt alive. The investors sat silently, their sharp pens resting on the table, their eyes fixed on the light dancing across the wall. And in that silence, everyone knew that the tide had shifted. The CEO stood straighter than before. His voice carried strength again. He spoke with confidence, explaining the patterns and predictions as though he had always planned it this way. But deep inside, he knew the truth. This moment belonged not to him, not to his assistants, not to his technical team, but to the girl who had stepped forward when all hope was lost. The janitor's daughter sat beside her mother again, clutching her notebook against her chest. She looked small in her chair, but everyone in that room now saw her differently. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just the child of a cleaning woman. She was the one who had turned disaster into possibility. Her mother's hands trembled as she reached out and held her daughters, whispering, "You saved them, my child. You saved them all." Tears welled in her eyes, a mix of fear, relief, and pride. She had always known her daughter was special, but never imagined the world would see it like this. One of the investors finally broke the silence, leaning forward, his voice softer than before. "Who taught you to do this?" he asked, his eyes sharp but curious. The girl looked at him quietly and said, "No one." Her voice calm. "I taught myself." The room erupted in whispers, some in disbelief, some in admiration. One man muttered, "Impossible." "No one learns this alone," another whispered. "Maybe she really is gifted," but the girl didn't argue. She didn't need to. Her actions had already proven more than words could. The CEO turned toward her, his voice strong but filled with something new. Something like respect. "Stand," he said. His eyes locked on her. She hesitated. Her mother looked at her nervously. But slowly she rose to her feet. The room shifted, every eye focused on her. "Ladies and gentlemen," the CEO said loudly, his voice echoing through the boardroom, "this young girl is the reason you are still here. This meeting would have ended in disaster. This company would have been humiliated, but she saved us. She showed us strength when we were collapsing." Gasps filled the room. Journalists' pens scratched wildly. Cameras clicked. The investors leaned forward, surprised to hear such words from a man who had always carried pride like armor. The janitor's daughter lowered her eyes, her cheeks burning with shyness, but her hands clutched the notebook tighter. Her mother covered her mouth with trembling hands, tears sliding down her cheeks. Never had she imagined the CEO of the company would praise her daughter openly in front of the most powerful people. The CEO continued, "I have spent years leading this company. I have spoken of innovation, of vision, of resilience, but today, she reminded me what those words truly mean." His eyes softened as he looked at her. Sometimes greatness hides in places we never expect. Sometimes wisdom comes from the voices we never hear. The investors were silent, some shifting uncomfortably, some nodding slowly. For the first time they felt shame. They had mocked her, dismissed her, laughed at her, but now they could not deny what they had seen with their own eyes. She had done what none of them could. One journalist whispered to another, "This story will shake the city." The other nodded. A CEO saved by a janitor's daughter. No one will believe it until they read it. The cameras clicked again, capturing the moment that would become headline news. The girl's voice was soft when she finally spoke. I didn't want recognition. I just couldn't watch you fail when I knew I could help. Her words carried honesty. Her tone free of pride. The room fell silent again, because her humility was even more striking than her genius. The CEO felt his chest tighten. He had spent his life chasing power, control, recognition, but this child stood here, unshaken, with no desire for glory, only the desire to do what was right. He realized then that she was more than a genius, she was a lesson. The investors began clapping slowly, one by one. The sound soft at first, then louder, until the entire room echoed with applause. Her mother's tears fell freely. Her daughter stood frozen, her eyes wide. She had never been applauded before. Not like this, not by the powerful, not by the people who had always ignored her. The CEO joined the applause, his hands striking together firmly, his eyes never leaving her, and in that moment recognition was complete. The janitor's daughter had stepped into the light. When the clapping faded, the CEO said firmly, "From this day forward, you will not be invisible, not in this company, not in this world." His words were sharp, but they carried promise. Her mother gasped again, clutching her daughter's arm tightly, unable to believe what she was hearing. The girl lowered her head, whispering softly, "Thank you," her voice trembling with emotion. She didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time she felt seen, truly seen, and respected. The meeting continued, but everything had changed. The investors looked at the CEO with new respect, but they also looked at the girl. The journalists scribbled furiously, crafting headlines that would echo far beyond those walls, and the janitor's daughter sat quietly once more, holding her mother's hand, her life already different than it had been when the day began. Recognition had come, and with it a door had opened to a future no one had expected. Not even her. The meeting ended hours later, but the energy in the boardroom still pulsed like electricity. The investors filed out slowly, their faces no longer cold with doubt but softened with thought. Some offered quiet nods to the CEO, others glanced toward the girl with eyes filled with reluctant respect, and the journalists hurried out, their notebooks packed with words that would soon become headlines across the city. The janitor's daughter sat quietly beside her mother, her notebook still clutched against her chest. She looked small again in the corner, but her presence carried weight now. No one could dismiss her as invisible anymore. She had stepped into their world and changed it, even if only for a single day. Her mother wiped her eyes with the corner of her sleeve, whispering, "It's over now, we can go." But the girl stayed still, her gaze fixed on the CEO who stood near the window, his back straight, his hands behind him, his mind clearly turning with heavy thoughts. Finally, he turned, his eyes locking on her. The room had emptied except for them, the assistants, and a few technicians still packing equipment. His voice was softer now, not the booming authority he had used with investors, but steady and almost gentle. "Come here," he said. The girl hesitated, her mother's hand tightening around hers, but slowly she rose, her steps quiet as she crossed the polished floor. The CEO looked down at her, this small figure who had carried the weight of the entire company on her shoulders without even meaning to. "What you did today," he said carefully, "was not luck. It was not chance. It was knowledge, courage, and vision. Things I see rarely even in men who have studied for years." His words were heavy, deliberate, each one striking her heart. She lowered her eyes, her cheeks burning. "I only wanted to help," she whispered. The CEO nodded slowly. "And that," he said, "is why you are different. You did not step forward for yourself. You stepped forward because it was right. That is true leadership." He paused, his gaze turning briefly toward her mother, who stood with wide eyes, uncertain of what would come next. Then the CEO straightened, his voice firmer. "From this day, I will not let your talent remain hidden," he said. "You deserve more than invisibility, more than silence. You deserve a chance." The girl's breath caught, her mother gasped softly. "What do you mean?" her mother asked nervously, her voice trembling. The CEO turned toward her with respect. "I mean," he said, "that your daughter will have every opportunity she deserves. I will sponsor her education. I will open doors that were closed to her. She has a future waiting, and I will make sure she reaches it." Her mother's knees nearly gave way. She held her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "A scholarship," she whispered, unable to believe it. "For her," the CEO nodded. "Yes, for her, because she has already proven what she can do. Imagine what she could become with guidance. The girl's eyes widened, her heart pounding. Her small fingers tightened on her notebook. She had dreamed of learning more, of building, of solving puzzles bigger than the ones she scribbled in her room at night. But she had never thought it possible. She had never thought anyone would notice her. And now, the most powerful man in the building was offering her a future. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered softly. "I only fixed what was broken." But the CEO shook his head, his voice deep. "That is why I owe you everything. Because when all of us failed, you stood up, and that is not something I will forget." The technicians who had overheard stood silently, their faces a mix of shame and admiration. The assistants exchanged glances. One whispered, "She's going to change everything." The other nodded quietly. Her mother hugged her tightly, whispering into her hair, "Do you see, my child, you are not small. You are not invisible, you are seen now. The world knows you." The girl closed her eyes, tears forming, but they were not from fear this time. They were from hope, a new feeling she had never truly held before. The CEO extended his hand toward her, and for a long moment she hesitated, her small fingers trembling. Then she placed her hand in his, the handshake firm, a bridge between two worlds that had never touched before. The world of power and wealth and the world of the unseen. "Welcome to your new beginning," he said quietly. And she nodded, her lips trembling but her eyes bright. The following day, the headlines exploded across newspapers and screens. CEO saved by janitor's daughter. Unexpected genius stuns boardroom. Invisible girl becomes hero. The city buzzed with the story. People whispered in offices, spoke in cafes, and children read about her in classrooms. She had become a symbol overnight. But for the girl, it was not about headlines. It was about possibility. For the first time, she believed her dreams were not impossible. For the first time, her notebook full of messy sketches felt like the key to a door that had just opened. Her mother walked beside her that evening as they left the tall glass building, their hands held tightly together. The streets noisy, the world busy, but in their hearts there was silence. A calm silence filled with pride and hope. The CEO watched them go from his office window, his chest heavy but not with fear this time, with respect, with gratitude, and with a strange new energy, because he too had been changed. He too had been reminded of what true strength looked like. The day that began with collapse had ended with hope. The day that began with panic had ended with promise, and the janitor's daughter, once invisible, now walked into a new future, carrying not just her notebook, but the weight of dreams that were finally within reach. Dreams that were finally within reach.